McLaren during the ground effect era were able to win 2 constructors and a driver's title as a customer team with the Mercedes power unit. The differentiators then were downforce levels, time aperture control, and more than anything else, ride control. McLaren were the masters of this, but the reality in 2026 is very different. We have become accustomed to incredible levels of engine parity between customers and manufacturer teams, but it was clear even during testing that compared to Mercedes, McLaren were at a disadvantage in the short term, and the brutal reality of Australia only highlighted how much work McLaren have to do. And now it's important to note that during pre-season testing, Mercedes ran an upgraded engine spec compared to its customers because they only had a limited supply of their latest spec power units. All of that, however, was equalized in Australia as McLaren, Williams and Alpine were all given the latest spec power units in line with Mercedes. It made it all the more surprising then that in qualifying McLaren were 80-10 slower compared to the pole time sets by George Russell, and then in the race Williams and Alpine both finished over a lap behind George Russell, with McLaren's Lando Norris crossing the line over 51 seconds behind the Mercedes. And now, this is partly down to the fact that McLaren to start the season have an inferior chassis compared to Mercedes. It's one of the many teams that so far is overweight, and by their own admission they also lack downforce. This was the main contributing factor to the large amounts of graining that Lando has picked up, which really hurt his pace. Speaking after the race, Andrea Stella said the performance gap comes from 2 main areas. One is the exploitation of the power unit, and the other is having more grip in corners. We lack downforce. Having said that, McLaren's glaring deficit was on the straights, where they were significantly and consistently slower compared it to Mercedes, and given that the two have identical power units, there wasn't an obvious explanation for this discrepancy. During qualifying, McLaren going into turn 9 were up to 10 km an hour slower compared to Mercedes. That is a significant difference, especially because in that sector alone, it could be worth up to 4:10 per lap. What is even more alarming is that through certain parts of the track where Mercedes were able to run in 7th gear, McLaren were forced to use 8th gear to be able to harvest the same amount of energy, with the consequence being that they were bleeding yet more lap time, needing to run at a lower engine speed. The reason why this is so important is that having a full battery charged at 100% as you go through turn 6 and onto the back straight rather than at 98 or even 99% means that by the time you get to turn 9, that extra 1 or 2% of deployment could be worth multiple 10 of a second a lap. Unsurprisingly, none of this, especially after qualifying, was lost on Andrea Stella, who not only confirmed that they are at a disadvantage compared to Mercedes, but even more concerning than that, they don't understand why they are at a disadvantage or how to solve it yet. Since we are a customer team of Mercedes, this is the first time that we feel we are on the back foot, even when it comes to the ability to predict how the car will behave and the ability to anticipate how we can improve the car. Well, we spent a lot of time looking at several overlays, not only with HPPP teams, in particular Mercedes, but also to other competitors. And definitely the results of this analysis seem to direct to the fact that we have work to do to exploit the potential of the power units, which once I see the potential that HPP is extracting, looks like there's more that is available. And now it's not obvious how you do that. For us, we are on a journey of knowledge. Certainly a journey that is earlier than the works team. But when it comes to, is this all that is available and that we are under-exploiting, I think we will need some more analysis to understand whether this is only about parameters that we can control or driver input that we can control, or there are some other factors more systemic that not necessarily a customer team can control. The sensitivity of these power units is something that Formula One has never seen. Every single lap has been calculated by the machine learning tools that the teams have, and this then programs the power unit of when to harvest and when to deploy. The complication is that if you get your lift and coast calculations wrong into T1, it sends the entire system into a loop with ripple effects further into the lap as the engine has to compensate, resulting in you losing battery power earlier on the next straight. Creating an energy usage strategy is more complicated than ever before, but it's informed by the intrinsic knowledge of how best to optimize your power units, knowledge that McLaren doesn't have. Even though every single Mercedes customer has the exact same hardware and the exact same software as the factory team per the regulations, or what became clear throughout the Australian Grand Prix weekend, is that Mercedes' advantage is twofold. Being a factory team, they have had seamless integration between their engine and chassis, meaning that from day one, their downforce levels have been used to create the best possible deployment strategy within the limits of their chassis. And secondly, Mercedes just has an intrinsic knowledge of every single aspect of their own power unit in terms of what it needs and also how best to exploit the software that has created as well. In an engine formula where knowledge is performance, Mercedes have started on the front foot because of the knowledge that they possess that their customers don't. What became clear to McLaren and also Williams was that, as James Vowles put it, there wasn't an open door of information about how best to get the most out of the power unit. The customers were given the same specification of hardware and software, and in the eyes of Mercedes, they themselves needed to go and figure it out. In the midst of all of this criticism, Toto Wolff hit back at any inference that Mercedes was doing anything wrong, saying, "It is clear when you roll out new regulations, there is so much to learn. Whether you have a customer that's on your gearbox or suspension, and in the same way on the power unit side, the development slope is very steep. You can never deploy things to make everybody happy. But I think most important is we are trying to provide a good service." McLaren knows that at the beginning of a new rule cycle, where the development potential with upgrades is so high as there is a lot of gains to be made in a relatively short space of time. Right now, any one of the top 4 teams could still be champions at the end of the season. On the chassis side, with upgrades, the car will become lighter and faster as they find more downforce, which will also improve their energy efficiency. Along with that, in the short term, it will simply be about optimization, understanding the power unit better from session to session, creating a better harvesting and deployment strategy so that they can fully exploit the performance of the Mercedes PU, which clearly right now is good enough to win races and possibly even the championship. However, the reality of being back in an engine formula brings back the same old question that the teams were asking themselves over a decade ago. Can you be champions as a customer team? This is exactly why Red Bull took the risk of creating its own bespoke engine program. It's why Audi decided to build its own engines, and it's also why, despite how disastrous their partnership has started, Aston Martin also wanted to become the Honda Works team. In that sense, McLaren has been caught out because unless we get to a point where their PU utilization is every bit as good as Mercedes is, or will they need to head out and search for their own manufacturer to get back to winning titles? That in itself is easier said than done, because in my eyes, McLaren only have 3 options. They could build their own engine like Red Bull have. However, the problem there is that to build up an engine program from scratch is a 5-year process in of itself and would require hundreds of millions of pounds worth of investment, which McLaren as a company simply would not be able to fund by themselves. The next option would be to partner with a manufacturer that is not yet in Formula One, with whom they could share the cost of development. A few years ago, Porsche were interested in joining Red Bull, so maybe they could reignite that desire. The last option, and I am not sure if this is even feasible, but there is already a power unit supplier with an engine factory and engineers that could build McLaren a bespoke power unit, and that is Renault with their engine factory in Ver. Now again, Renault owns Alpine and Ver, which are 2 separate entities. And so how this would work, I don't know. But if McLaren can agree to fund and support Ver in a way that Renault's Alpine never could, then it could be their most cost-effective way of becoming a manufacturer team, and also within the shortest amount of time as well. If they feel that becoming a factory team is their only real option, well, there you have it. If you did enjoy this video and want to support the channel, then don't forget to subscribe. That would be massively appreciated. And I'll see you in the next one.